Iwambo wambingini. Iwambo wambingini. Yagoni jingo wambund morongo mogono bro betting. Retek wambetek wamp nogondak. Konumba mimetek tag brung buka jinga apte nonuman. Tenop morman tenop agape de gig dimen meninga. Wampek de tinnen. Mijn pentek wat in nogendak retek. Ja, kono betete me ne moon jetting. Telling oronga so angen. For those that went before us and came and held this for us, and in time they have bequeathed this to us. Unceded, we acknowledge that fact. There will be a time when they will become fully acknowledged. But for them to bequeath everything that we have, we thank them. And our commitment is to protect, maintain, and give over to those that follow us. This is our commitment. Welcome. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Michael Mel, for your initial welcome to us all here. Michael comes from the highlands of Papua New Guinea, and I'll introduce him more in a moment. But I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands of Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands, most particularly the Gadigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation here in Sydney. Year by year, and too slowly, the reality and worldview of Australia's Indigenous people is entering deeper and deeper into the Australian consciousness. As I've tried to show on this map that you can see now, the truth of our Indigenous history and connection to country is emerging from our colonial attempts to erase them. And so I acknowledge Indigenous elders past and present and hope that we can all benefit from what they have to teach us. I'm James Cox. I'm Executive Director of Pacifica. I'm speaking today from Gadigal country. And in fact, I'm speaking from Michael's office. We're in the same room, which is very nice. Welcome to everyone out there in New Zealand, the Blue Pacific and Australia to this conversation about localisation and decolonisation. I invite you to identify yourselves in the land where you are sitting in the chat and look forward to hearing more from you soon. Pacifica, my organisation, was founded with an ambition to promote peace in the Pacific. In addition to addressing various types of violence, we're also concerned with the lingering structural violence caused by centuries of colonisation. Where colonisation is an act of violence, decolonisation, while risky and messy, is a step towards peace as we deconstruct the power of one group over another. This conference has shifting the power as one of its themes, and we heard an uncompromising challenge this morning from Dekan Ali in her opening address as she put INGOs on notice for practices and also asked how can we build the pipelines of power and resources to local organisations. And now is a great time for us to talk about this. Earlier this year, Pacifica and the Whitlam Institute released a report based on conversations with 150 Solomon Islanders, Ni Vanuatu and Fijians, Pacific Perspectives on the World. We believed that Pacific policy in Australia was insufficiently informed by Pacific voices and wanted to change that. It was both fascinating and instructive for the research team to see the enthusiasm of our participants in sharing their views. Several findings of the report have pointed the way to today's conversation. One finding was that Pacific Islanders are proud of their own ways of doing things and share a growing realisation that Pacific modes can and should stand beside those that have been introduced. Perhaps my favourite quote of the research came from Solomon Islands, capturing this sense of the importance of the Pacific experience. This person said, "Western education is good, Our mistake was thinking it was better than ours. The second finding was a strand of deep continuing frustration with outside actors, with INGOs that don't give sufficient respect or space for Pacific organisations, with contractors that don't engage with local capacity, and with donor government reports that describe a Pacific unrecognisable to people who live there. In short, they're first for the Pacific to be recognised on its own merits and for Pacific Islanders to engage with the wider world, but to do so in a Pacific mode. One final finding is the high level of awareness and concern among Pacific Islanders for Torres Strait and Aboriginal people, who many see as their kin. Pacific Islanders see Australia as having a white face, with Indigenous people largely invisible from daily life, and especially from leadership. Right after we launched the report, the coronavirus pandemic transformed all of our lives. For Pacifica, one of the most striking aspects of this time was seeing Pacific Island states take control of their own situation, closing borders, protecting citizens, and negotiating effectively for humanitarian assistance where needed. Economic hardship has certainly followed, but I believe that the Pacific Islands will emerge from this crisis being widely recognised for their capacity to manage their own affairs in their own way, in partnership with each other and others. These experiences led us at Pacifica to want to explore localisation and decolonisation, not as abstracts, but as real live processes that are happening now. We're certainly not alone in this, but our approach is perhaps distinctive in our desire to look at them together and to look at their wider effects. So this session is a step in that process. We have two outstanding speakers here, one of whom hasn't yet arrived, but hopefully she will come here soon. We have two outstanding speakers here, but our main wish will be to hear from you, to get a picture of your own views and experience of decolonisation and localisation. Localisation and decolonisation are relevant to much more than their respective homes in humanitarian practice and international relations. In today's sessions, we'd like to explore the ways in which localisation reaches beyond the humanitarian sphere and into everyday life. Similarly, for decolonisation, formal independence is just one dimension. Many of us are working to colonise our minds and hearts and social systems. Both involve a reclamation of agency, power, and identity on one side, and a commitment to step back or alongside on the other. So today we want to talk about these concepts and to learn from you how you're approaching them. If you came out of this morning's session with both the keynote and the panel with things on your mind and things to say, this is a good place to be. After we hear from our presenters, we're giving this session over to you. It's a step in our own decolonisation practice to step out of the way and to listen. And I've talked way too much already. At the end, I would be delighted if one or two of you would be willing to report back to the group to tell us what were some of the 2 or 3 main items that stood out for you. So if you'd like to volunteer as a rapporteur, just let us know in the chat and we will invite you at the end. In terms of participation, we will be inviting you. You can put up your hand, or the chat function is much easier to ask your questions. And then if you wish to speak, you will have plenty of time after our presentations are completed for lots of people to talk. That's the way we want this to work. Yes, at this stage, I'm going to introduce Dr. Michael Mill formally, and hopefully when Linda Kenny is online, I'll introduce her as well. So Michael is the manager of the Pacific and International Collections at the Australian Museum in Sydney, which is where we are in fact right now, and is on the board of Pacifica. Michael focuses on Indigenous processes of art making, teaching, learning and performing, primarily in the context of the Mogai of Western Highlands Province, Papua New Guinea. His art performances and publications explore and articulate Indigenous ways of seeing and experiencing art making, body adornment, performance and engagement. Michael has lectured, performed and curated across the Pacific, Australia and around the world. He was a recipient of the Prince Claus Award from the Prince Claus Foundation in the Netherlands for his work in cultural communities for the Pacific. So his approach to decolonisation is very different from what perhaps we're used to in our sector. And I'm looking very forward to hearing him speak. So I will pass across to Michael now.
Thank you, James, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for having me on your screens and listening to us today. Me happy to mas, me happy to mas lo stop one time yupla lo today long talk one time play. Enim kan morum nugri am no man enemy. I just spoke in 3 languages. Obviously English. And for those of us familiar with the Pacific, Oceania, as Pele would have loved to coin it in relation to the home of the Pacific. We have Pidgin, a Creole, and then of course I've spoken Melpa, which is my mother tongue. So I have those 3 languages. I think it's an indication of our capacity as Pacific Islanders to be able to have 2 or 3 different radio stations in our heads, so to speak, but connected to the real world out there. And I think that's a very important indication. And I'd like to firstly share with you something that came out of someone that was from Africa. But I think Africa in many ways has got some reasons for me to identify with, not only for the fact that there are people over there, but more importantly, in terms of our current history and in terms of decolonization and colonial outposts and the need for decolonization, the need for nationhood began in many ways in a large measure in terms of the number of countries that developed into having their own independence in the 50s and 60s. And one of those whose name was initially as James Thiongo Ngugi, he later on made a point out in 67 to say, I am no longer James Thiongo Ngugi, I am Ngugi wa Thiongo. He said, if you know all the languages of the world, but not your mother tongue, that is enslavement. Knowing your mother tongue and all other languages too is empowerment. I come now to Papua New Guinea, where one of our great philosophers, statesperson, and politician, but also a writer. We cannot be Bernard Narakobi, that is, for those of us familiar with some of his musings in relation to nations and nationhood and decolonization as an idea. We cannot build a nation simply from technology. We cannot build a nation purely on the basis of the wheel and on the basis of the steam engine. We must build this country. We must build our civilization on values which have been passed on to us from generation to generation. And I say this, that if we do not agree on common values, if it is not now the basis and the stem upon which we nurture and grow our children, then I say there will be no future for this country. So indeed, the development of common values, the development of a nation, if we want to talk about decolonization, I think for us, it's really about what is the nation? What does that represent? Decolonization as an idea, I think there are many answers and many responses from many of us. But for me, it's an important way in which we want to begin to look at ourselves and then our countries. And for us to begin to look at it, I think it's recognized and it's accepted that there are many nations within Oceania. And I say this in relation to each community and cultural group. They have their own ways of seeing and making sense of the world, a network of common ancestry, a shared history, a common language. In today's language, and in Pidgin in particular, and in PNG, we quite often refer to that history, that heritage, as Time Tuna. We quite often look back quite fondly at that, the remnants of our heritage and our history. if we take anything to the present, and I think that leads to some of the things in relation to decolonization, what do we take with us and how do we make those selections? So Time Blongtumbana gives us references in relation to who we are. But today we know that in Oceania, in the Pacific, we have grown up through colonization. And colonization in the sense that we have been trained, we have learned, we have been educated in ways of Western culture, Western civilization. And in many ways, we've migrated to various regions of the country for opportunity, or without looking for opportunities and for work. The introduction of an economic system, a national system of government, an introduction of belief systems, education. In many of these things have impacted the old ways. Any connection to our past in terms of our sense of belonging and place, in terms of our history and heritage, more and more now is looking more through memory, perhaps from books, and even today, maybe in online imaginings. I think for Pacific Islanders, that's an important aspect in relation to looking back. Need we look back? I think the most important aspect for us now is to bring the past into the present, to recognize and value that present in our lives rather than looking fondly at what was and how it was. And I think that's very, very important for us if we want to talk about decolonization, to be able to recognize and value our sense of who we are. So we need to perhaps ask some key questions. And one of those might be, what kind of Oceania, or for the like of, for the countries, what kind of Vanuatu, what kind of Solomon Islands, what kind of Fiji do we remember? What kind of Oceania do we find ourselves today? What do we want to see for the future? So if decolonization is going to be seriously something, then the words of Ngugi, Narakobi, need now to be realized ever more fervently. As we speak English, as we speak Creole or Pidgin, it is very important for us to speak our own language, articulate our own knowledge, because it is in those that there is an aspect, there are many aspects about who we are as a people. But looking back at our heritage is not an easy enterprise. We have been, in many ways, told, and for those of us who have been educated, we've been told that there are aspects about us that were good, there are aspects about us that were bad. But who determined for us what was good and what was bad? And what does one talk about in relation to what we want to take forward and to the present day? If we want to decolonize, if we want to say that, yes, we were colonized, we are aware of that fact. We are also aware of who we are as a people today. And I think that's, for me, a very significant aspect. And for me to speak in both languages, my mother tongue, in Creole, and in English, provides for us an opportunity. We don't need to look too far afield to look at how these things are very important for us. You only need to look at the Japanese. You only need to look at China. You only need to look at other countries that have been able to hold on to their history and heritage and yet evolve and develop in ways that can now indicate to us that it is possible. For Papua New Guineans and indeed for Oceanists, if we are to seriously take on decolonizing, to demystify our past and bring it to the present, how far do we want to go and what do we want to do? Having said that, how do we want to then travel? Because in many ways, our youth today, we find them in many situations of conflict, in many situations where there are fragmentation, segregation. The idea of the homogeneous communities of 50, 100 years ago are no longer there. There have been some dilution. There are some changes. The political questions are many. How do you then bring together our past that recognizes the current influences and impacts? Therein lies a challenge for all of us. How do we decolonize to emancipate ourselves? To decolonize, to find another road. I think the neighborhood has given us reasonable names, maybe, but in my view, perhaps not. They've called us failed states. Are we truly failures? We in Oceania seemingly are from East Timor, Timor-Leste, West Papua, Bougainville, Solomon Islands. We are part of what is an arc, the arc of instability. I think for those of us from Guadalcanal, for those of us from Malaita, the conflicts and the situations that arose, are we truly failed states? We truly there is an instability amongst us. In many ways, there are some things about nations and making a nation. And it seems with all of these goings on, we quite often make it that there are signs of flawed nation making. There is a weak national consciousness, or is there? Or should we say we have failed in our political independence and power governance? There are many issues for us Pacific Islanders, Oceanists, Papua New Guineans, Solomon Islanders. I think the question for us is if we want to truly decolonize, if we want to truly find ourselves, the questions are with us. And maybe we should look at West Papua as well, because when you look at the 60s, we got, Africa became independent, many African states. In the 70s and 80s, many Pacific Island nations, or became nations. And that nation making is a process that's ongoing. But in amongst that ongoing, we do need to find ourselves. And the last word for me should go back to Hawafa. Oceania is vast. Oceania is expanding. Oceania is hospitable and generous. Oceania is humanity rising from the depths of brine and regions of fire deep. Still, Oceania is us. We must ultimately not confine ourselves, again, physically or psychologically into tiny spaces that they have put us in. We need to liberate ourselves. We must not allow anyone to belittle us again and take away our freedom. I'll stop here, thank you.
I'm just going to give us 30 seconds to digest Michael's talk before we move on to the next thing. That was a very rich meal to have right after lunch. So we'll just give us a moment, then I'll resume. Okay. All right. Thank you, Michael. There is so much to think about in that, like the ideas of colonized, being told by somebody else what was good and bad, and being able to get past that and find your own accommodation. The sorts of labels that are applied, and how can we find ourselves. I hope that you all have many questions yourselves that you may want to ask, and your own thoughts on this. So please, you can start to write these things down now and put them in the chat so we're ready. I'm delighted that we now have Linda Kenny with us as well. She's managed to get her technology to work. I better turn my speaker on so I can actually hear Linda. Hello, Linda. How are you?
Hi, James. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, so Linda Kenny is a Pacific island researcher based in Vanuatu, and she'll be well known to many people on this call, no doubt. She's got more than 10 years experience working with humanitarian and development researchers. She's Pacific Associate with the Humanitarian Advisory Group. Her recent work includes evaluating the localisation of humanitarian action in the Pacific for Red Cross, researching localisation and COVID-19 in the tropical cyclone Harold response, and working with Pacifica on our Pacific Perspectives report. And much of her recent work will be informing the conversation I'm going to have with Linda today. So I hope that our connection remains stable. Things are looking good so far. So Linda, so we're going to do this as a conversation with Linda rather than a talk. So my first question for Linda is there anything else that we should know about you as, you know, as a Vanuatu, as a Vanuatu citizen and a person?
Well, can you hear me? First of all,
Yes.
can you hear me?
Yes.
I hope my voice is not echoing. I think you've said everything about me. The one thing that maybe I want to share with everyone is I am not against outsiders, or I am not against humanitarian actors from outside coming into the Pacific or coming into Vanuatu to help. But I am more for, you know, the support that we need. If we don't have the expertise, that's where, and when we will be needing the expertise from outside, then that's where you come in. So don't take us wrong that we don't want help from outside. I want, you know, a good collaboration and a good coordination amongst everyone, right? So yeah, I'll start by saying that.
Okay. Which it's a nice introduction, because it leads to my first question to you, which is to ask you to say a bit about the experience around the double hit for Vanuatu of the coronavirus crisis and tropical cyclone Harold, and what the experience of that was for people when the when the usual humanitarian actors weren't able to do what they had previously.
Okay, there were, I mean, COVID-19 came, TC Harold and came along. I will say that there were mixed feelings, both among the expatriates living here and also among the Nivans living here, and especially the Nivans who are in the system, who were the ones coordinating during PAM, who are now not in the system, sitting back and looking at what everyone is doing, what everyone is, you know, coming up with. And I will say that not everyone was happy about what was going on. But, you know, we can't do much because we had COVID-19. I guess everyone who is listening in now will have heard some stories about how it all went. But from my experience and from what I've heard doing those different researches, were that COVID-19 came in as a blessing also, where it gave the opportunity to local actors, even those working for INGOs, indigenous people working for INGOs, giving them the opportunity to actually lead, to actually get up and have the confidence, and also to actually build the skills that they didn't have before. They were depending on our international actors. They were depending on the decisions from outside. Now it all, you know, it was all on them to make the decisions, because they're on the ground, they know what's happening, what's going on. So yeah, um, everyone, some were complaining that it was slow, response was slow, but well, at the end, everyone was happy that COVID-19 came as a blessing in disguise, where everyone were able to, they did not have the choice but to, actually lead, and that was a good thing.
Okay. What the experience of people on Tanna was one which I think was quite interesting through this time, and this is a story that you've told to me before, about the ways in which sort of local humanitarian action happened. This wasn't strictly cyclone based, but it was to do with some of the other crises that Tanna was experiencing.
Yeah, so we
Yeah.
had the ash. So it was not only the southern part was not partly affected by DC Harrow, but it was hit by. I mean, we had the we usually have. I mean, often we have this ash fall, and when the Northern Islands were um, having those, well, Northern Islands were hit by DC Harrow, the Southern Islands were hit by this ash fall, and what happened was the INGOs who had the locals working in there, they had a really good network where they built that partnership with the local organizations, local NGOs, or even local bodies, where they, so the INGOs provided the transport, and the local communities provided the food, and that, that collaboration resulted in these villages being affected by the ashfall, were able to continue to get the food from, from the areas on Tana that were not that are not being damaged by the ashfall. So yeah, and that's not the first, that is not the first, that practice is continually, was used in the past, so we continue to use that system. So it is not a new thing. Yeah, Michael. Sorry, James.
It's all happening over there.
Yeah. Yeah. You want me to continue on, or?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, it's an interesting uh, example of the collaboration between the INGOs and the local organisations in what seemed to be a constructive way. And I seem to remember that it was very much those local outreach points of the INGOs who were the ones who were sort of connecting with local society.
Yep, and that same practice was also used during the DC Harrow. Yeah. One thing about Vanuatu is a small country, and everyone becomes friends, and the expatriates who are here, they become friends with Nivans. So sometimes because of that relationship, then we have this really good network coordination going on. So that's one thing good about Nivans and the expatriates who are working here. Over to you.
Yeah. Do you need a moment there, or?
Okay.
Yeah. So. Okay. Right. Here we are.
I had to go and find another PowerPoint. Sorry.
So yeah, perhaps are there any through you've done quite a lot of localization research over these last several months. Are there any other things that have really stood out for you in what you've learned from your various inquiries around localization? And yes, I guess, and beyond that also the fall in various forms of direct international engagement with Vanuatu. How has that influenced life in the country more generally? I think so. So how has localization sort of bled out as something that is happening sort of across life? Like, that'll be the most difficult question to answer. Yeah.
Well, Michael, we in Vanuatu we have a decentralization act, and localization seems to, you know, seems to be supporting that decentralization. And in Vanuatu, everyone is going for localization. I'm not going to use decolonization. I'll stick to using localization. What I mean in Vanuatu, since we started the topic of localization, I can say that more and more that is happening now. More and more people are taking localization more seriously. Um, the what we have is that we want to be leading, we want to be coordinating, we want to be, you know, giving all the ideas how we want things to be done. Um, and I mean, how can we continue to let other people tell us that this is how you should live, this is how you should respond, these are the needs that you need, right? We need to also have our say in that. We need to be the ones saying how we want things to be done. Um, like I said, we know our people, we know the place. Like I will keep saying this because some people will say, yeah, you know the place, you know the people, but you don't have the expertise, the skills. No, I'll say that that's true. That's not true. That may be true some years ago during the colonialism. Now that's not true anymore. And now we will be needing uh, help from overseas or help from the international actors. Is we will be needing funding to help us to do our work. If you don't trust, you know, that the excuse is we are not really good in managing the funds, I think it's about time that we forget that. We throw that into, you know, we throw that excuse into the rubbish bin and forget about it. Let's try for now. We want to see that things done differently. Let's change the system. Let's do away with all this trust issue and all that. Let's start giving that opportunity to locals to be the one talking about their needs, to be the one telling us how much we need, to be the ones, you know, going out and implementing the activities, going out and doing the response. Um, let's stop with all these excuses and let's support. Let's support. We are not saying that we know all the answers, but we are saying that give us the opportunity, let us do this, and come in and support us. You know, throw us the idea. Oh, we think that maybe if we do this, then things will work better. So throw us the idea and let's discuss together. Let's consult together.
There's an interesting parallel in that with one of the things that Michael was saying when he was talking about, you know, we as Pacific Islanders, you know, were told by other people what, you know, what was good and bad and so on, and living in this way of being told what, you know, what capacities you had, and you seem to be saying that now this is a moment when there's a chance to push back against that sort of a perception, and people are really taking much more ownership and control and having more confidence in their own abilities.
Yeah, and I mean, where we don't, where we still lack change. Don't stand back and say, okay, they don't have the expertise, but they're saying they have it. No, no, no. Come in and say, I think there's this area where I can come in and help. I I think there's this area where I can come in and support. I mean, at the end of the day, we are all working towards the affected people or what issues is there for us to tackle. It's not about competing here. It's not about competing here. I mean, let's grow up. Let's just work together. Let's just support each other. Where we don't have the resources, come in and help out us with those resources.
I like that. Let's grow up. That's a very nice moment. I think I'll stop talking to you now. At this point, while the audience gets their own questions and ideas in order, I might ask Michael if there's anything that a question you want to ask Linda, and you missed most of Michael's talk, but I think probably a couple of moments of conversation.
I think I came in time.
Yeah, okay.
I heard most of his talk and I agree with everything. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to mute and I'll pass across to Michael, and then you guys can have a chat about.
Thank you, Linda. Hey, good normal. Yeah, good flat talk, you know. Yeah, thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Thomas. Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I mentioned about it, and you've indicated or sort of broached on it, but not necessarily going to it in terms of our languages, and because I believe very much that our knowledge, our history, our stories seems to be a kind of a throwaway, but when you really think about stories, and stories hold very much about who we are as a people. And so therefore, language is a very significant aspect in relation to holding on to who we are and how we are. And a lot of our sense of the world and our processes of decision making and engaging with people, our language provides for a very significant aspect. I wondered whether you had a strong view on this in relation to our own sense of identity, of belonging, of ownership, of place, where the language was a key marker. And then related to that, of course, some of the changes and collaborative efforts that you speak of. For me, learning our languages and others who come into our communities must ensure they also are willing to learn a language, connect with us in a real way. For me, I've learned English. The circumstances were tough, but I'm not saying repeat that history, no. Learn the language, understand the community. Language quite often is a ticket into a space. Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, well, that came up, I think if I can think back, we had a recommendation from some groups about, maybe coming up with an information or things that international actors need to know before they can come into our country or whichever country in the Pacific to respond. Like that was before TC Harold, and one of the things that they had in the list was learning the language, learning the cultural norms, learning the different practices in the community, how you should treat staff as an outsider coming in, those different things that they need to know as part of their, getting them prepared to come into Vanuatu or Fiji or wherever. They need to know this. And yeah, language is one very important one. I will agree with you, Michael, but even if I can speak your language, I did not grow up in Enna. You're from Enna, right? Yeah, I didn't grow up from Enna, so I don't know the different practices in the different beliefs, those different things that you know. So in order for me to know that, I need to go and live in your place for so many years. So I will really get to know the stuff in them. It's the same here. If the people are coming in from outside, they need to already know about this. Because even me from Vanuatu, I am from Tana, but I don't know about what's happening in Ambroma, Pentecost. So when a response, when there's a disaster and we want to send a response team, it would be really practical to send people from Pentecost to go to Pentecost because they know their people, they know their customs, culture, and all those. So yeah, I maybe maybe you agree with me or not, but yeah, language is also very important, but also you being from that place, because then you will understand the people more than me, even if I can speak your language.
Yeah, learning your language. Yeah, if you are from, I mean, you're from being from Tana, and then if you have to go to say one of the islands where obviously language is different, there are options. We do not have to close the doors. One option is to learn the language of that community. On the other hand, with the language that have been brought on under the historical circumstances, I speak of the Creole, I speak of English, or in your case, Francophone. Yeah, or given your history in relation to French and English, and in relation to Islam. I think those options are available for us. But the reason why I'm saying our own languages, it's a sense that if you are from Tana, there should be some things that give you a sense of being Tanese. And there are those that come from any of the other communities. Language is an important ticket, knowledge, history, a lot of things are in that language, and our own practices would be strongly held, and there is a strong sense of continuity. Whereas present day in PNG and many other Pacific Island countries, we quite often are now looking back into our past, but we look at it with lenses that speak of pidgin and English more and more. And that is a worry for me. And that's why I've made it my point to speak my language. And I can change the dial on a radio station anytime I want. Suppose me tok one temiu and me ka tok pidgin. And me straight no more. No. Me way blank no more. So not one time what fala stop, okay. You mean we can speak in English just to be inclusive.
Yeah.
It's those options, that capacity. It's that sense of empowerment. The ability to, and I agree with you that we don't need to chase everybody away, but the others, when they come, they have to be prepared to recognize that there are these systems. And these processes are part of the decolonization. And decolonization is not for the black fellows only, it's for the white fellows too. They need to demystify themselves. They need to decolonize themselves too. No, money is the cheapest way of decolonization or colonization once again. So learn the language. Anyway, this learn.
Enough. Back to you, James.
Yeah, this question of who decolonizes and how, I think, is a really interesting one. Like, there's often a lot of things, some people might say, oh, the decolonization, it's a process of us white fellas getting out of the way, which is kind of where I admit I start, but it's also how you decolonize your own mind. And for us, it's how do we decolonize our own practice. Like, I think about the observations made in our research on the ways in which we haven't created the conceptual or literal space in Australia for Indigenous people to be present and visible and contributing and driving society. There's just one other tiny aspect of it. Looking at the chat, I note there's a comment from Lisa Marie Tepu. She said, drawing on Michael's earlier address, I think it's also a challenge and a responsibility for Papua New Guineans and Pacific Islanders to decolonise our own minds and attitudes, which is more about what we were just saying. Lisa Marie, did you want to say something to add to this? It would be great to hear from you directly if you want to say more or explore.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, hello. Welcome.
Thank you. And I was just really inspired by the talk. Sorry, I'm from Papua New Guinea and I'm currently studying a master's in Melbourne. And I was just reflecting on what Michael was saying about how language is a ticket into a space, which is so true. Like particularly, I guess for my generation and my parents' generation, you kind of feel like you're conditioned to excel in a Western-centric environment, and then it doesn't leave you much space to kind of reflect and think about those historical ties or reflect on what it is to be Papua New Guinea, because you're so focused on getting that great job, getting into a great company and providing for your family, or even working in the development space, like, these are the answers we need. Let's just go out there, be diplomatic and, get along with all your foreign bosses and all that. So there's not much of a space for us to think about decolonization. And I guess speaking as someone who's grown up in the city and not really learned how to be fluent in my mother tongue, like that in itself is a loss that I think a lot of people in my generation are struggling with. But I think it's also quite the opposite experience for people growing up with lower incomes or in rural areas who have the benefit of being fluent in their mother tongues, but not have access to some of the other services and benefits. If you do come from a middle class income family or up from the higher classes. So if anything, my takeaway is to learn a bit more about PNG's history and what exactly it means for us moving forward into the future and what vision we can create, and how we can work with our partners, international partners, to get there. So that wasn't really a question. That was more just a rambling of what I picked up so far. Thanks.
Yeah. Lisa Marie. Thank you. I mean, when I went to school, I mean, it's a long time ago, but it was tough. We were made to learn the English language, and I have nothing but admiration for the nuns that did that work to ensure that I was fluent in that language. Unfortunately, I also missed out on my language. In fact, I could never speak my language fluently. I stammered and struggled, and in a lot of ways, I started in language and then code switched back into Pidgin or English. It was embarrassing. I felt embarrassed in the company of those who were fluent. So I quite often hid, and I didn't want to go there again. But I made a conscious choice. I made a conscious choice to go back, make the mistakes, and put up with the laughter, those who giggled and laughed at me and my mistakes that seemed so simplistic to them, yet it was so daunting. But I had to go through those hoops. I know. I made the choice, so I can code switch between one and the other. And then now I make it my business not to code switch into English or put a word or two in English in my language. I make it completely it's a conscious choice. I think that's something that we need to have. Yeah, me. So I would encourage you to see if we can make that effort. It would be great because it says a lot about our sense of who we are. And you raise some important points about our history, our heritage, and our children learning that history and heritage. Quite often, language is a good marker for that kind of journey of finding out about ourselves as much as others. Yeah, I'll stop here, but thank you. Thank you.
I think it's a very interesting, Michael, here, illustrating how decolonisation oneself is scary and takes some courage. And like, you know, we saw some examples of great courage in Declan Ali's talk this morning. And you've talked about the struggle that you've had. Linda, did you want to add anything in comment? No, Linda's good. Okay. There's a question from Phil Lindsay. Did you want to speak to the room?
Sure. Thank you, everyone, and thanks for the discussion. The whole question about language, it's obviously broader than words, isn't it? And it's the whole way we do things. It's what is behind the language and the words that we use, and encompasses so much about the way we do things. And this isn't my question, but thinking about it's really important to use language and for outsiders coming in to try and learn language and to be able to connect. One of the struggles I think we have within the development and the aid sector is that the systems are all built there already, and the systems themselves have power. And while language can eat away at that, we need to be better at changing the systems to be more appropriate and to remove some of the power from them as well. And coming from that idea, Linda, you said that the response to Tropical Cyclone Harold was locally led with some support from international organizations. I'm really interested to know how that response, led by local people in ways I assume that were more locally appropriate, how did that differ from previous internationally led responses? And I'm thinking more about the process rather than the outcomes. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
With Cyclone Palm, we all know Cyclone Palm was like Category 5 because the biggest ever in Vanuatu, and I think it was also.
Linda, can you come a bit closer to your microphone? No, you just need to be closer to your microphone, I think.
This one?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Phil, can you hear me? Yeah? So Cyclone Palm was a Category 5, and it was the first biggest cyclone. Vanuatu has faced so many disasters. Like every year, we know it's time to prepare for a cyclone or hurricane, but this one was really big. And everyone, I think, Phil, we had, and I think because you read from all these different reports that different people were writing about Cyclone Palm, that there was a really big flow from outside. We had so many international actors coming in. But I would say if I compare Cyclone Palm with DC Harold, there was so much confusion with Cyclone Palm because there was confusion with who was leading, who should they the people who are responding, who should they listen to? We have leaders within the country who are already here, and you have these international coming in, knowing everything, trying to dictate Well, this is what I heard from even from the experts living in here. So they were also confused. They were also depleted by international expats coming from outside. So there was a big confusion, and then there was confusion within the government as well. All I can say is that with TC Harold and then COVID coming in, it kind of like opened our eyes to see that, well, if this disease COVID-19 can come, then for sure in future we will be having other different, deadly diseases as well. So we might as well do something. For TC Harold, I would say that there was a really good coordination. The processes we had, we want to know more about the processes. We had different classes within different ministries. So you have health classes, you have gender and protection classes, you have what you call water and all those. So we had different classes. What was good about these classes was that we recognized that we did not have enough human resources to go into and also the funding to have everyone going down to the affected areas to do the assessment. So what was strongly encouraged within the classes was that, for example, health cluster was giving out forms to other classes as well. So when you go to a community and you see an issue or something that's related to health, then collect the information, bring them back to us, and we will see what we can do about it. And this was also encouraging other classes as well. So it was not like health going and doing the only coming, but no, yes, so many times we had different informations, but at least there's a studying in there where we recognize that we need to be working together. We need to be sharing information. We need to be helping each other where health team can't cope because of the funding issues. Gender protection, they are able to collect those information and bring those back to health clusters, right? So that we had that, and also we had the INGOs also working with other INGOs as well. They were able to help themselves with the resources. So care is, for example, care is doing most of its program down south. So they were really fortunate. We were fortunate that they had those resources and they shared that to other INGOs working in Santo, for example. And they were able to share those resources. And not only with that partnership, they were also able to share those resources with other organizations as well, like the Red Cross. So yeah, you can see there's a really close partnership within the INGOs, with the INGOs and the government ministries, government bodies, government partners. Yes, we acknowledge there were gaps, but hey, there's nothing perfect in this one. We learn as we go, but you can see that there's that practice happening, and that's, for me, that's really good. Taking it down to the communities, we had the CDCs there in the communities, and the provinces were able, with the leadership and coordination from summer profits, they were also encouraging INGOs working down there to walk through this network, to share the resources through this network for them to share those networks within their communities. And this did not happen so much during cyclone time, but this time it happened during TC Harold. We also had the women network actioning was doing a really good work also. They were working, they have women who talked together in Papua, and for this crisis they went in, they set up, and they were able to use the women to do the assessment. Some of the details or some of the issues that weren't collected by these other teams still were collected by these women. So yeah, it was good that everyone was working together, not only with INGO government, but also within the community as well, and that's a good change and should be encouragement.
So it sounds like you took some of the good things of a, if you like, an international structure, but you appropriated them to your own context and used them in a way that was right for you, which I think is really encouraging. And there's some really good learning from that we can hopefully apply elsewhere.
Yeah, because it was very much encouraged and maybe also advised by the government through NDMO and the clusters that we need this sort of process to work together, because we recognize that we did not have enough resources, especially with the COVID-19. The resources were, when they come in, the supplies, the NFIs, they had to be in quarantine for some time. So luckily, Red Cross and World Vision, I think, even for they had other warehouses in the provinces. So, but like one of the recommendations that came up a lot is that if they can be more, these storage houses in all the provinces during this time, so that when we have another disaster, then we have them prepared. So we can just tap into them, use them instead of waiting, with the COVID-19 still on waiting for this NFIs to come, go through the quarantine. And there was this point made by the CEO of Red Cross, which I really like.
Yeah, just while hopefully Linda will unfreeze and come back on and finish what you were saying. But just while we have a gap there, Phil, yeah, thank you. We can think quite easily of some of the experiences I've been through. Yeah, she was coming on.
Oh, there she is.
Yeah, while she's hopefully coming on, just a quick example of my experience of process. I mean, this is going way back, and I've got my parents still here. They were youngsters,
Okay,
but okay, good.
Okay, want to do you know Arenia? You can Arenia.
And now you come good here. You talk.
Okay, Phil, I was going to tell you, Madame de Calon, she recommended something that I went, wow, I didn't think about that. So you see, we need each other to give all those ideas. So her idea was that let's not wait for a natural disaster to come and destroy all the trees, and then we sit back and we go, oh, please, DFAT, World Vision, Red Cross, whoever, can you give us iron roof? Can you give us, she recommended that during peacetime that we weave the kangura leaf, we weave the coconut leaves, we prepare the posts, put them aside, so when the cyclone comes and destroy the trees and everything and our house is burned down, we have those prepared. We can use them and put up a shelter really quickly. And I think that's the way we should all be thinking. I thought that was really clever of her to come up with that idea. We wait until a disaster strikes and then we start thinking about rebuilding. So, yeah, I think that everyone should be thinking the way Madame de Calon is thinking from Red Cross 112.
Yeah. Thank you, Staret. Thank you, Linda. Phil, yeah, I was going to say, just to follow on from what Linda's shared in response to you, one of the things I remember quite clearly was the church, the early churches that came into my community. One of the things that they took on was really to learn our language. They not only learned it, they spoke it, but also wrote in it. And so the early schools that we went to, They used the English alphabet, of course, but they wrote it in relation to our language written. The hymns and prayers were very much that. What was also interesting, and this is from observing my parents and having seen them now, they continue to follow Christianity, but at the same time, they have never forgotten nor laid aside the connection to ancestry. The two are in both hands, if you like, one on one side and one on the other, but they are consulted and and referenced in various activities in whatever way. And that accounts, I think, for the fact that the early missionaries, made the effort to learn the language and then translate a lot of the ideas, and people recognized, and then their acceptance to stay. And even when they passed on, they had a Christian burial, but they also had a traditional melpa, if you like, burial, a funeral ceremony. So both of these systems were able to allow us to stand alongside and have the ability and the choice. And I think the process, you can see it happening. I don't think that that process is only for the blackfellas. No, I think the process is for all of us. And we have to make that choice. We have to make the choice to go into it and then step out of it when we can and when we want to. It's our ability of choice making. So decolonizing lies on both sides. And that's my finishing point. And I think it's very important that we demystify some of those things, make the choice of jumping into the pool, sink or swim. And most of the time we swim and we survive. More than that, we thrive. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. I think one of the things about learning a language is that you have to go in and you have to sit and listen, and you start. I mean, your position is like a child in some ways, and because you can't express yourself as you would like to. You have to listen. You have to do things very simply, and so that brings a humility to the situation and to the relationship to start with. And I think whether we go in and try and learn language, or whether we just go in with the attitude of sitting and listening and with humility, that would that would help us all, I think. Thanks, James.
Can I add something?
Yes, go ahead, Linda.
James? One other thing that I saw during PAM was that many of us, the indigenous Nivans, we are very shy. We don't have the confidence to speak. We go into a meeting and we shut our mouth and we listen, and we, even though we don't agree, we agree. We go nodding our heads. But with this DC Harold, we still have some indigenous Nivans still not talking, but you can see that some are now talking, and that's really good for me. That's really good. A few of them are now talking, compared to TC PAM, where everyone was just listening to people from the government, senior positions, and our INGOs, our international actors. So I think because of that mentality that the white man knows more than us, the Black people or indigenous, so we tend to just like sit back and shy away and let them talk and make the decisions, which later we go, no, we don't want that. But the decisions have been made. So I think if we go out to these meetings in the future, that let's encourage our indigenous people from the Pacific to talk. If there's an expatriate sitting in that meeting, encourage whoever is sitting there with you who's from the Pacific to talk, and don't take over and start, because you know it all, then you think that, okay, no, give the chance to your indigenous people also to raise their concerns, make them feel comfortable so that they can also talk. You will be surprised with whatever is coming out from them, that you will go, wow, okay, I didn't think of that. So yeah, give them the chance, make them feel comfortable so that they can open their mouth and talk. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that would be a good cue. I think Ms. Tepu, I think she did well to open that opportunity. So if there are any, suppose you me all Pacific Islander, or suppose you me all landlo place, you me stop school, and a good time now, lo. You me sharim tok one time, Linda, na me, na was I told one talk only stop long, and you me sharim talk. So it'd be great to hear from other members of the Oceania from the Pacific if they're here. That'd be great. And I think Ms. Tepu did well to be able to come through and join the conversation. Excellent.
We only have probably about 10 minutes remaining, so now is the last chance for you to ask a question or make a comment. Yes, I'd like to echo what Michael just said, that Lisa being the first one to put up a hand and jump in and comment was a very welcome and positive step for her and for the talk overall. Yes. Are there any other observations, comments, questions from the room? It's also okay for us to finish early too. We sort of had 90 minutes. Here's our friend Suzanne. Hello, Suzanne.
Hi, thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Linda, and also thank you, Michael, for. Can you hear me?
Can't hear you.
Yep.
Oh, I'm unmuted.
Can you hear? Or is it me? Okay, sorry, it's me.
All right, okay. Thank you for the great word. Just have reminded me a lot of some of the work I've done with local organizations. I have a question because I teach global development at USW, and we discuss localization, that trend quite a lot. And then a lot of the students, which are many of them Australians, because it's undergraduate, they're then asking what their role would be in the future. And I do know it's you know, when I worked with grassroots organization in Afghanistan, it takes some time to understand what it means to be supportive, but take a backseat in letting them. And you know, I think as Linda, as you said, we don't need the help. We maybe need some help in certain areas. So I wonder what the message that you would give to them would be, or that you want me to pass on to them, in terms of, if we are to be successful in this process, where we don't perpetuate power imbalances that come from colonial histories, what would you tell them? What do you think the key characteristics? I mean, I always just tell them, you know, if you want jobs, just look for local organizations and get employed by them, because they will then put you in the positions where they need help. But is that the right advice to give, or would you say something else? I'm just curious.
Susanna, maybe I should start off. Before COVID-19, we have this group of students coming in from Sydney. They come in as part of their, they need to come to a Pacific country to do some case studies, and that will add to their merit points or whatever. And that was one of the questions that some of them were asking me as well. And I told them that it will be really good for you to, come, be with, work, engage yourself with local organizations and learn from them, and then start to find out their capacities or the gaps in there, and identify that together with them, and see if you can help them with whatever knowledge or skills that you already have. And where you don't have, maybe help them find that help elsewhere. Uh, Also, like I said earlier, it would be really good to know about the cultures, the customs, the way people do things here. Learn the language. The language. If you know Bishlama, you like in Vanuatu, if you know Bishlama, you are man Vanuatu. That's it. Uh, you are part of us if you can speak our language. So learning the language and knowing the language is really important. Um, the other thing is with some of the experiences that we've had with the exchange, I did one interview and I talked to, I'm not going to name which organization it is, but they raised a concern about them coming in, helping out, and then that what power thing comes in, and they want to be the one, um, you know, holding on to all the senior positions. Oh, that's don't. I mean, I discourage that. Come in, help them, capacity build them, let them, let them hold those positions if they can. And you hold those positions that they don't have the expertise in. Once you start creating that relationship with them, you will see that they'll become so what lenient, if I may say, even if there's some positions in that they can do, they'll say, you can have that position. I mean, it's all about building good relationships. Don't come in and say, I know everything. You follow me, no. Come
Yeah,
in,
no, that's great. It's
build
great.
that relationship, help, capacity build. That's my advice to the students. Yeah.
Thank you, Linda.
Susan, thank you for that. There was just some anecdotal, experience that came through just recently. Of course, PNG celebrated its Independence Day on the 16th of September this year. There were two Australians, they young'uns. They were kind of from the country, within country New South Wales. They went up to PNG under a new scholarship scheme, which is recently introduced, the Colombo Scholarship.
New Colombo Plan, yeah.
Yeah, the Colombo Plan. And there's a way in which Australians are now being put into, say, universities or places where they could really connect with and interact. And they had from what they had reflected on, and they sent a post on LinkedIn after they came back to Australia, and then they wished Papua New Guineans, happy independence, but they did it all in Pidgin. They had about almost 25 minutes of, and it had the highest rating of likes and responses into the hundreds, if not thousand, over. The recognition was of the fact that they could wish everybody, but in Pidgin rather than English or any other. And they talked about referencing a betel nut and a PMV and going places and naming those places and the people they met. And there was a very personal touch to the connectivity. And that identification and that acceptance by the responses was remarkable. And for me, I think it was our ability, those youngsters' ability to really find themselves within and in amongst, rather than always being on the outsider. You're an outsider, but you're still in there. So anyway, that was a great experience that I saw, and I responded to it too, and it was great. Thanks.
Okay. I'm going to be talking on Michael's microphone because my computer's decided to do some strange things. We've used up all of our time pretty much, and someone might want to have a couple of things to add conclusion, but I've been chatting to some of the participants privately as this has been going on, and an interesting parallel across, you know, people from all sorts of different backgrounds is I'm in the process of rewiring my brain. Whether you're Papua New Guinean or Nivan or Australian or from elsewhere in the region, or possibly from Germany, like Suzanne there originally. You know, we're all trying to find ways to rewire our brains and our thought processes. You know, we have heard how this is difficult and time consuming. It takes some courage. You know, that was some of, you know, and that you need to be, or we need to be prepared to look a little bit foolish from time to time, maybe, as we try doing this. I think also Phil's comment in the discussion that, you know, it's a chance for us to have that child's perspective and to learn things anew, I thought was a really fascinating concept. So I think there's a sense that we are all on this same pathway together, you know, whatever the color of our skin and our upbringing has been. So I think that's all that I want to say about that. Was there anything else, any brief comments, Linda or Michael, that you wanted to say in conclusion?
Yeah, I mean, I think I might want to say the point that you just mentioned, that sense of vulnerability. And it comes back to, I suppose, in a sense, our humanity. And quite often, you know, you put yourself in a position of vulnerability, you are now putting away all the doors and the closures or frames that you would have put up. So that sense of vulnerability, a willingness now to be vulnerable. And quite often there is a sense of identification of that vulnerability, and quite often it lends to be a support rather than a shying away. So I think it happened, and I think in many instances that's been a very positive impact rather than, and because being vulnerable is scary, and quite often we don't want to be scared. We want to be sure. We want to be self-assured that it's okay. But sometimes it's better to be vulnerable, leave yourself open rather than always secure and always, yeah.
Linda, last word.
Last word, let's just be humans and let's just go out and be true to ourselves. Like, let's not pretend to be somebody else. Let's just, you know, be friendly, go out, see the needs, work together. Let's not compete. Let's just, you know, be human, good human beings. That's all.
Okay, well, on that note, thank you through to us. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. I hope that was a worthwhile chance for you to digest your lunches as we all talk to each other. And I hope
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, stick around, Linda.
Thank you.
Okay,
I hope I come see you, Linda, sometime. Bye.
Yeah, come over.
Okay. Hope so. Bye. Nice to see you, Mel.
Bye.
Bye.